Go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I am Carrie Gibbs, the Director of the Global Intercultural Research Center, GLINT, and an Associate Professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies. As we get started, I see a few people rolling into the room still. Please keep your microphones muted for the duration of this event. We'll be using the chat box as our way to communicate with each other. So thank you for joining us for the first GLINT Talks series presentation for 2021. Before we get started, I'd like to invite the GLINT graduate assistant to share with us a land acknowledgement. Kimberly?
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kimberly, and I am the GLINT graduate assistant. Acknowledging that we reside in the homelands of Indigenous peoples is an important step in recognizing the history and the original stewards of these lands. The land on which UCCS stands is the ancestral Native American tribes, including but not limited to the Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Jicarilla Apache, Pawnee, Kiowa, Osage, Comanche, and Lakota. We wish to honor with gratitude the land itself, intellectual contributions, and the people who have been its custodians throughout the generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to those of you in our audience who might be new to our GLINT Talk series. The GLINT Talk series is designed to promote the research and creative works conducted by UCCS faculty. This semester, we have 3 events scheduled. Today's presentation by Dr. Stephany Rose Spalding, as well as 2 talks scheduled for the month of March, with the possibility of 1 more in the works for April. This semester, we are also excited to announce our GLINT Seed Grant competition. So if you are a GLINT affiliate, please check out the GLINT website for details about our Seed Grant competition. The deadline for proposal submissions is March 26th. Please also keep an eye on the chat. We have posted a couple of key links for you, a link to our website, of course, a link to the full registration site for the GLINT Talk series so that you can sign up for future events, as well as that previously mentioned link for the call for proposals. A couple logistics before we get started. The event is being recorded today and will be available on YouTube after. We will make this available through the GLINT website once the recording is ready. If you are joining us in the Zoom room, as mentioned before, please leave your microphone muted. We're trying to reduce the background noise and interference. Our presenter today will talk for 35 to 40 minutes, and then we will open up for questions and discussion, conversation with the audience. We would like to invite you at this time to use the chat to submit your questions and comments for Dr. Rose Spalding. Okay, let me go ahead and introduce today's presenter. I'm going to read because her achievements and contributions are vast and I don't have enough brain space to hold them all. We are really pleased to welcome Dr. Stephany Rose Spalding to share with us her talk titled Recovering from Racism, Journeying to Truth and Conciliation. Dr. Spalding is the Interim Associate Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion here at UCCS. She began serving in this role part-time during fall 2020 and will continue in this role and actually be continued full-time, or was full-time effective January 1st. She will stay in this role until the completion of a national search, which will be initiated this semester. Dr. Spalding has said, "I believe universities have the potential to be sites and models of justice for our society, where we can explore, embrace, and better our whole individual and collective selves through a living practice of equity, diversity, and inclusion." As a founder and a member of the Board of Directors for the Truth and Conciliation Commission, Dr. Spalding is a national leader in advocating for a more socially just society. She is also active in Colorado Springs as the senior pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church, board member of Raw Tools Incorporated, a member of the Board of Directors for the Colorado Foundation for Universal Healthcare, and advisory board member for the UCCS Matrix Center for the Advancement of Social Equity and Inclusion. In 2020, she was Colorado Springs Business Journal Women of Influence recipient. In 2019, she was recognized with the Southern Colorado Ally Award. In 2013, She was recognized with a CU President's Fund for Humanities Award, and in 2012 as Mosaic's Outstanding Advisor of the Year. Phew, as I mentioned, so many achievements. Dr. Spalding teaches and writes, researches on the intersections of race, gender, class, religion, and equity. Her research focuses on the sociocultural impacts of racialized representations of individuals and communities in English language literatures and popular culture from the United States and the African diaspora. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rose Spalding. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gibbs. It is such a pleasure to be here, and the extension of the invitation from the office, from GLINT, is again just my honor, and I'm grateful for those of you who are taking the time out of your day to participate live in this discussion, as well as those who will watch it after on YouTube. I am going to state that some of the content may not be easy for us to hear or bear, but I want you to know that it was selected very carefully and is very much intentional in regards to the conversation that we are having right now as it relates to recovering from racism, a journey to truth and conciliation. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully all goes well in that. There are some video presentations, so we will optimize for that as well. And hopefully someone can give me a thumbs up and let me know that you all can see what I have just shared. Thank you. That's our life in the midst of COVID, right?
Exactly.
So, recovering from racism, the journey to truth and conciliation. If you are like me, then many of you were glued to the television on January 6th, 2021, witnessing what has been one of the most horrifying incidents that has taken place on American soil in modern history. I'm going to play a video, and again, as I said, some of this content is not easy to digest, but it is very relevant
on the surface
to what we are experiencing right now.
Before. But the anger and the tension felt more intense. Congress was about to confirm Joe Biden's presidency, and most here were convinced it was a fraud.
Do you think people are angry today?
Absolutely, people are angry, and you can feel it. You can feel the rage, the madness.
Before Trump's speech was even finished, many were already making their way to the Capitol.
Stop protecting tyrants! Stand down!
And as more protesters arrived, the mood darkened.
Hold up, man! Hold up, man!
We're here at the Capitol steps right after the Trump speech was finished. People started filing over here and started pressing against the Capitol. Police are spraying mace and pushing the lines back so people can get through. We're going to move forward.
USA! 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 Come on!
But as we pushed up,
Who's on the media? Get the fuck out of here! Get the fuck out of here! Get the fuck out of here! Get the fuck out of here!
they tried to smash our camera.
As stated before, the images that have been on constant repeat since January 6th, and even more so as we are experiencing a second impeachment trial of the former president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, these images for many people were in and of themselves harrowing. But for an individual like myself that has been working on systemic racism for the last 20 years of my life in both academia and community, what I witnessed on January 6th was more personal and visceral than many could imagine. What I saw was fully on display the ways in which white privilege, white supremacy, white masculinity is elevated and treated drastically differently for those that are for individuals who and communities who are not part of whiteness, part of white culture. And so as a person of color, what was on display was not just a reaction to what one thought was a failed election, but it was really the celebration of white supremacist masculinity in ways that degraded and denied the work, the life, the history of Black people, Indigenous people, and other peoples of color throughout this country. So much so to the point that we began to see notifications just like this message from the nation that articulated how many who were present in this moment were responding to the ways in which police were responding to them. And articulating, this is not America, a woman said to a small group. They are shooting at us. They are supposed to shoot at Black Lives Matter, but they are shooting the patriots. Again, in this statement, what we have captured along with the video shown is the way in which white women as well stood in the space to articulate the separation between people of color, specifically those who support Black lives, and those who saw in their grasp a dramatic shift in the way that they had been experiencing the nation themselves due to white privilege, due to white racial violence and harm. Unfortunately, even more so for me, just days before January 6th, I was in DC at the Capitol with a very good friend, Cori Bush, who had just been sworn into office for her first term in the US Congress. And so I had literally just been in the space that these riots and the insurrection was taking place. And so the memory of physically being present was very much at the forefront of my mind in that moment. Additionally, throughout the summer and years before, but specifically the summer of 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, organizing, being present and organizing in response to continued Black exploitation, Black dehumanization, the loss of life of Black people due to the pandemic, as well as state-sanctioned police violence. I had been organizing in community right here in Colorado Springs and across the country and witnessed for myself the disparities and the inequities in which those who have power responded to our demands to honor Black life versus what was happening in regards to a lost election. While in Colorado Springs this summer, even to the knowledge of local police, there were snipers this is the same event. These are images from the same event. There were snipers who were bearing down and trained on us in this moment. There were police that understood these snipers were just across the street from us, and they did nothing. They did nothing to protect Black life, and very little has been done in the city and state to make sure that the cause for the protection of Black life are heeded from Black individuals. So on January 6th, in the midst of this trauma, in the midst of this pain, we begin to recognize just the ways in which Black life in the United States is so dishonored and disregarded. And I found myself posting in the space that the only space that I had access to because we were still living in a global pandemic. And so I posted this on my social media.
Oh my God. America. I just need you all to know, I know that nobody is probably watching this live right now, but Black justice workers are not okay. We are angry. We are infuriated watching what is happening at the U.S. Capitol right now. First of all, because we have friends who are in the Capitol, whether they are Congress people or aides or interns or what have you. We know we have family members who are there. But secondly, we are triggered as, I'm trying to keep it together, but we are triggered because we are watching our lives and how little our lives matter play out in full color for the globe. Knowing that we have organized actions, knowing that we have peacefully, genuinely peacefully protested and have been met with snipers and tear gas and rubber bullets and death. And these fools are literally, they have taken over the Capitol building. We are not okay. Not for this nation, not for ourselves, not for our communities. We are not okay because we recognize and we know that we would be dead right now in this moment. And so for every person who is out here still trying to have a conversation or debate about whether or not white supremacy is fucking real, it's real. And you are seeing how white privilege plays out for the whole entire globe in this country right now because these people are successful. I just watched on MSNBC, I watched a Capitol Guard run who is fully equipped with baton, with gun, with tear gas, with all kind of weaponry, run from these terrorists who are taking over this country. We are not okay. And we will not be okay until every doggone white person out here recognizes this is the result of white supremacy. This is your fault. This is on your watch for sitting by silently for years, allowing this and wanting to have a discussion. Well, maybe not this.
As one can see, in the moment, I was extremely expressive as well as emotionally charged. But the words and the work that the words that were articulated in that moment was not just about an emotional response. It was also rooted in years of activism as well as research. As a critical race scholar and critical gender scholar, years of research that articulate the ways in which white supremacist ideology functions and operates in the United States, as well as the leading statements regarding how we dismantle white supremacist institutions, how we dismantle white supremacist culture, how we dismantle oppression in this country, and the ownership of those who inflict oppression to take in the responsibility of undoing this work. Unfortunately, that video was taken out of context. It was rebroadcasted by Campus Reform and the College Fix. And then from there, we began to receive on campus notices and threats and statements of harassment to my UCCS, yes, email address, and to our UCCS phone, articulating that my diatribes were racist against white people, calling for them to fix their families, and it was appalling. The fact of the matter is, you are a house slave, a white globalist elitist who destroyed the Black family unit and flooded Black communities with Planned Parenthood slaughterhouses. You're an Aunt Tom who sold out to your own people due to poverty pimping sociopaths like yourselves. Your Black males are murdering young Black males in mass. Next time you choose to run your sellout house girl racist mouth, I'll make sure to remind you what an evil sociopathetic cunt you truly are. These are words that were sent to my inbox, yes, at UCCS. This is a message in my inbox at UCCS. And yet, many of you also saw the communique that articulated that my words were wrong, that my scholarship was out of place, that my experience was too emotional in the moment. But then I also reflect upon the ways in which we have consistently denigrated the experiences of Black people, Black women specifically, and looked at the ways in which we have tried to address the racial harm that exists in this country to no avail. I remember being in Washington, D.C. on the anniversary of the murder of Emmett Till as well as Breonna Taylor to reclaim the March on D.C. 50 years later, still looking at the ways in which white racial violence shows up and takes the lives of young Black people. I remember being present and fighting for the honoring of Ahmaud Arbery's life and having to call together, yes, in Colorado Springs, a body of white allies just so I could walk my neighborhood. I remembered in that moment that if Tamir Rice was still alive, if Tamir Rice had been still alive, that he would not get the same treatment of Kyle Rittenhouse, who was able to not only purchase a gun illegally underage, but to cross state lines, murder individuals in another state, go back home, and at this very moment, they do not know where he is. He has evaded his parole and they do not know where he is. Yet Tamir Rice was killed in an open carry state for playing with a toy gun. This is the ways in which Black life is not honored in the United States. I remember the images of the National Guard being called out before any event or organizing that we did over the summer and at previous years. I remember the way in which they were prepared militarily to meet Black Lives Matter protesters and the way in which they were ill prepared, as well as cozying up, taking real live selfies with those who were insurrecting violence, with white men who were insurrecting violence on January 6th. And so, no, it wasn't just an emotional response. It was based in years and generations of history and
Today
research.
remembers the triumphs and tragedies that have taken place in our historic struggle for racial justice. Today, we commemorate the March on Washington to Jobs and Freedom in 1963, where my father declared his dream. But we must never forget the American nightmare of racist violence exemplified when Emmett Till was murdered on this day in 1955, and the criminal justice system failed to convict his killers. 65 years later, we still struggle for justice, demilitarizing the police, dismantling mass incarceration, and declaring and determinedly as we can that Black Lives Matter. In our struggle for justice, there are no spirited victories. For on this day, 12 years ago, I was honored to address the Democratic National Convention in Denver. And on that night, on that evening in the Mile High City, our spirits were soaring as the Democrats nominated Barack Obama, who would go on to become the first African-American president of these United States.
The experiences and the response to that which has happened on January 6th for an African-American woman rooted in scholarship, activism, and lived experience is not one that we can sit and deny. It is not one that we can cast aside in hopes to unifying and glossing over what we have been articulating for generations. And it is not just a momentary response to what is happening in the United States. It is years and generations of systemic institutionalized oppression that continues to operate and function in intricate intersectional ways here in the United States. It is not just the summer's reality of a pandemic that has gone wild, but it is the reality of the racial disparities that function in our healthcare system consistently because of the ways in which Black bodies are not valued or seen as human. It is the ways not just dying of a pandemic, but Black women dying in childbirth in the most advanced country in the world at rates worse than many undeveloped nations. It is Black women having medical experiences in which their bodily pain is not recognized and articulated and respected because there is a underlying bias that Black women do not feel pain in the way that their counterparts feel pain. But it is not just in healthcare. It is also in the systems that educate and incarcerate at ridiculous rates Black populations across this country, Hispanic populations across this country, where Black bodies are 12% of this population, but incarcerated at a 33% rate. So when we talk about the difference in policing, when we talk about the incarceral system that continues to met out an injustice towards Black people, it is not just an emotional response. It is a calling to history. It is a calling to honoring and regarding the factual evidence that is the lived experience of Black people to this day. It is responding with the reality that I can no longer live in my home in Colorado and am right now out of state because the only offering that UCCS could provide for me was more policing in a system and a injustice that does not honor my humanity. To turn to Colorado Springs police is never an option for those who understand the history and the realities that Black life continues to live with in the United States. It is also a miseducation of Black community that continues to lead to wealth disparities in income, wealth disparity in home ownership, wealth disparity in job opportunities that continue to keep Black bodies on the front lines as essential workers during the midst of a pandemic so that they die at higher rates because they do not have the opportunity and the affordability to work remotely like many others have been able to make the adjustment. It is the reality of watching Black death, Black unemployment, the lack of wealth continuously cycle in generation after generation after generation. So no, it is not just an emotional response, but the fruit in which we are seeing, the fruit that is so strange in the United States, is deeply rooted in the ways in which we have planted and seeded and soiled and watered the tree that is this American life. That for hundreds of years living through American slavery and segregation and only being at the space of perhaps 50 years of doing and advocating for the work of civil rights, yet wanting to expect that this body, this population, this marginalized, minoritized community would ever be at an equitable and reasonable life expectancy and opportunity that their counterparts have had centuries of a head start with. It is deeply rooted in the soil and the ideological practices of what we understand as American culture. In 1853, Thomas Jefferson wrote these words. Yes, the great crafter of the Declaration of Independence and leader of our nation, president, as well as signer to the U.S. Constitution, he wrote in 1853, "I advance it therefore as a suspicion only, that the Blacks, whether originally a distant race or made distinct by time and circumstances, are inferior to the whites in the endowments of both body and mind. It is not against experience to suppose that different species of the same genius or varieties of the same species may possess different qualifications. Will not a lover of natural history, then one who views the gradations in all the races of animals with the eye of philosophy, excuse an effort to keep those in the department of man as distinct as nature has formed them? This unfortunate difference of color and perhaps of faculty is a powerful obstacle to the emancipation of these people. Many of their advocates, while they wish to vindicate the liberty of human nature, are anxious also to preserve its dignity and beauty. Some of these, embarrassed by the question, what further is to be done with them, join themselves in opposition with those who are actuated by sordid avarice only. Among the Romans, emancipation required but one effort. The slave, when made free, might mix without staining the blood of his master. But with us, a second is necessary, unknown to history. When freed, he is to be removed beyond the reach of mixture. These are the words of Thomas Jefferson and so many that we herald as founding fathers of the United States of America. These are the ideas in which they formulated and instituted laws that continue to impact our culture and our society today. Whereas it was not just a matter of station, that it was a matter of being, of special being, that Black bodies, Black lives were so different that they needed to be enslaved, that they needed to be kept from reproducing with white people. And so if it were just a matter of this is an economic situation that we are profiting off of right now and we can utilize the labor, then when emancipation happened, we might have been able to move into a different space that still regarded the humanity of Black life. But because these are the seeds and the soil in which this nation has been planted, the idea that Black people and Black life is not still human still continues to permeate in the fruit that we bear today. And so Thomas Jefferson was not alone, but he learned this from the ways in which, again, foundationally, from slave codes in Virginia and throughout the colonies, we were able to look at the ways to keep Black life from mattering in this country. When we look at the ways that the English Parliament, ending the monopoly of the African slave trade by the Royal African Company, opened the doors for so many else to participate in this process, that it went from 5,000 to 45,000 bodies transported across the Atlantic in a year. And that's just from England. And the ways in which the Virginia Assembly began to articulate that slavery was a perpetual station and status for Black life. Or in 1723, where Virginia declared that it is forbidden for Negroes to keep weapons. So when we look at the ways in which gun legislation functions and operates today, that the advocating of the Second Amendment works very differently for white male bodies than it does for Black bodies, because in 1723, the ideological perspective was that Negroes do not have the opportunity or the regard to own and keep weapons, and that they also are forbidden from having meetings and gathering a sense of community, that they could not gather in bodies of more than 3 in our colonial era, carries out still today in 2021, so that when Black bodies begin to organize a protest, when Black bodies begin to organize an action, the National Guard is immediately called out. Whereas it is not the same practice when hundreds of thousands of white males show up to storm the Capitol. But it is even longer and deeper than that. More than 500 years to the very spiritual practice that is rooted in the discovery, quote unquote, of America itself, the age of exploration itself, going back to Pope Nicholas V, who articulated in 1452 and established the doctrine of discovery that has still been used today as late as the Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That the doctrine of discovery still matters 500 years later here in the United States. This is the soil on which we stand. That those who are of European Christian descent have the power and the right to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saccharins and pagans whatsoever, and the enemies of Christ, whosoever placed in the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his and their use and profit. In 1452, this was the spiritual, political, economic declaration from the Pope that gave rise to the age of exploration, that gave rise to the discovery, quote unquote, of the United States, to the genocide of indigenous people, the enslavement of African people, Jim Crowism, to January 6, 2021, where mass amounts of white men articulating that their doctrine of discovery was being usurped from them, and they have every right to insurrect violence on a government and a capital that will not honor that the Pope in 1452 have given them spiritual practice to do so. This is the soil on which we stand. This is the soil in which we have built these United States. And this is also the impetus for the work that I have committed myself as it regards to truth and conciliation. The truth that we must first deal with is that there is no place for us to reconcile in the United States as it relates to white racial violence. For reconciliation presupposes that there was an agreement to go back to. But there is nothing honorable, there is nothing agreeable in the ways in which this country has been formulated and manifested over the last 500 years. And so if we are to unearth and undo the systems that we have grown so accustomed to, if we are to respect the lives of Black people in this country, if we are to hear the pain of Black women and Black academics as just as viable as their counterparts and not out of emotion and distress, we must begin to tell the truth. We must begin to deal with the centuries of alkaline soil that we have built this country and this culture and our ideological practices in. And then and only then can we come to the place of conciliation. For conciliation is a deliberate work of mutually respected parties that will form an agreement in a way to move forward. This is what we are called to do. And I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share how I have journeyed to the place from recovering from racism to truth and conciliation. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was, as is noted in the chat, very powerful, really powerful. I'd like to invite the audience at this point in time to please submit your questions, share comments, etc. in the chat. And while we're giving the audience a moment to do that, we have a few questions already that we'd like to share with you. Would you please share with us and discuss a bit the difference between calling for unity and working towards justice?
Again, for a lot of people, unity is a euphemism for uniformity and to whitewash whatever experience that people are dealing with and wrestling with. It does not hold within it the idea of accountability. And that is what the pursuit of justice requires, that justice cannot happen without first taking account for the harm that has been done and then coming to the place of how we might move forward and progress forward. So when we are talking about unity, if it does not come with accountability, it will never lead to justice.
Thank you. I think that came up in a conversation that we had last week, actually. I'd also like to ask you about your thoughts on, in the process of conciliation, your thoughts on the role of the scholar or the scholar activist, both in terms of, we have a number of faculty members in our audience, for example, but I'm thinking about scholar activists, both as faculty members and students, of course.
Absolutely. I think in order for us to ever get to the place where we can begin conciliation is first the truth part, right? And the truth part is not just telling our stories. It is about our narrative and the experience and relaying what we have gone through, but it's also teaching and reframing what people have learned, right? So scholar activists are very necessary because they have access to data, they have access to information, they have access to multiple narratives that give a fuller history of what our nation has experienced. And in order to do that, there are so many communities that will have to be re-educated about what they think they know in order to get to the place of then going forward with conciliation.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience that asks, what is your understanding of regional variations on the matter? For example, blue states versus red states.
The reality is, white racial violence shows up everywhere. It is not limited to political party. It is not limited to where a person may or may not live. For example, I have spent the last few days, I don't get much sleep, y'all, but I have spent the last few days responding to and writing about the epic failure of Bruce Springsteen and Jeep during the Super Bowl commercial that they co-wrote and produced together. And many people were articulating, but he's a liberal Democrat. And my response was, and you see how much white liberal Democrats get it wrong. Again, so it really doesn't matter when it comes to this work and the history of the United States. As many of our indigenous brothers and sisters will tell you, wherever you are standing on stolen lands because of the way in which white racial violence and white harm has operated in the United States.
Thank you. I wonder if we could, while we're waiting for questions to roll in from the audience, I invite the audience again to submit. This is your opportunity to engage with Dr. Rose Spalding. While we're waiting for those to roll in, I wonder if we could return to a comment that you made in response to an earlier question about the need for re-education for certain communities. And when I think of education, I think of needing to have a certain openness, right? So if we are going to learn something new or relearn something, there needs to be a degree of openness. And what are your thoughts on re-education for when that openness does not exist?
It makes it a lot harder. I can certainly attest and agree to that, having been in a number of spaces where resistance was the intention of those who walked in the room. So it does make it extremely difficult, and can block the ways in which we are able to grow in our understanding and our knowledge. Any educator that I know would say they would prefer a curious mind, a wondrous mind, an open mind, as opposed to someone who walks in with an agenda and simply does not want to give space to new knowledge and new discovery.
We have two questions in the chat, one from our GLINT graduate assistant, and Kimberly asks, focusing on systematic oppression, would you reflect on the interconnectedness of systems in our society?
Yes, as I pointed out, even the issues that we were organizing around over the summer, they were precipitated by the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others that we can't or don't even know their names, killed by police violence. But the way that organizing manifested and the growth of the protest across the country that it was allowed to happen was because of how the pandemic was impacting people's inability to move about. So a lot of people were at home. A lot of people were glued to what was happening on their television or smart devices. And again, they were not just seeing police violence or state-sanctioned violence. They were also seeing healthcare and the disparities of healthcare and the numbers of Black and Brown Indigenous communities rising in terms of death and mortality to COVID-19. They were also seeing the ways that so many people were dying in those communities because of COVID-19, because they could not stay home. They were our grocery workers. They were our janitors. They were the individuals whose jobs don't allow them to sit in front of a fancy computer and beam into remote access. And so all of those systems, they were also those who had poor housing, did not have access to broadband. And so their kids needed to go to school. And the need for their kids to go to school made it hard for them to figure out how to work, and also hard to figure out how to keep their family safe from COVID attack, right? So all of these systems were operating and functioning together to create this explosive moment throughout the summer of 2020. And it's not just the summer of 2020, as we see, it is so historically rooted in the ways in which we structure these institutions. We structure housing, we structure education, healthcare, and so forth. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. It is utterly interconnected.
Thank you. We have another question that asks how this talk has been scheduled for several months, and this audience member is interested to know how your life has, as an activist scholar, has changed since we initially scheduled this talk.
It has actually changed dramatically. When I began, I was definitely in a more hopeful place in terms of where this country was going. That's not to say that I won't return, but as I shared in the talk, and I know I shared a lot, so people might have missed it or whatever. I literally am not in Colorado right now because of the harassment that I received after the college fix and campus reform. They shared out into very conservative right-wing space my video, and the harassment began on campus. And so I have literally been, for the safety of my life, not in my home and not in the state, and have not even. Unfortunately, this is the first time that I'm even articulating this publicly. Like, most of my friends don't know where I am for my own personal safety. And that is because I did not feel that Colorado Springs police would protect me once the harassment began from the college fix and campus reform. And I know that there are a number of community members that live in Colorado Springs who have tried to take my life before. So a lot has dramatically changed for me in the last few months. And it is what it is right now. It is life in America as a Black woman.
Questions are really rolling in now, so I'm going to move right to the next one, which is from our YouTube audience. This is really heavy, but I do want to make sure that we get at least one question from our new audience, the YouTube audience. How do you respond to the appropriation of truth-telling and coming to voice by the January 6th insurrectionists?
So how I personally respond is to keep showing evidence-based information, and to keep like pressing and honing in on first narrative, like first account narratives, and advancing and amplifying that as much as possible. And I encourage for audience members to do the same, to triangulate information, to teach the triangulation of information, to teach media literacy, and to keep amplifying first person narratives of individuals who are living this experience.
Thank you. One of our audience members asks if you could share your thoughts, clarify your thoughts on the difference between whiteness and being white.
So sure, I can give the very academic definition, in the sense that whiteness is an ideological perspective of how one sees and operates and functions in the world, as opposed to, I assume this is what the question is about, as opposed to someone who is categorically labeled as white. So to clarify, there are individuals of color that can adopt whiteness as a way in the state of being in the world. They can have an ideological perspective that privileges what whiteness is, that centers white perspective, and they don't necessarily have to have white skin. And for me, that is a difference between being white and whiteness.
We have a comment from Dr. Jimenez that asks if you would share a little bit more about the specific aims of the Truth and Reconciliation work.
So Truth and Conciliation is designed to begin the process of collecting testimonials and truth-telling, and capturing what it is to be a racialized person, racialized body, having a racialized experience in this place that we articulate as the United States. That's one leg of it. The second leg is the education piece, to really unearth and to teach about the history of white racial violence, beginning with the doctrine of discovery. I know that the 1619 Project locates their work at the beginning of slavery in the United States. But for us at Truth and Conciliation, we are very much concerned with indigenous genocide. And so we know that if we are going to ever tell the truth about white racial violence, that we have to deal with the expansiveness and all of the history of that violence in, again, this place that we call the United States. And then the last pillar, the last leg, is to really be able to get to the place. So many truth and reconciliation processes in nations elsewhere don't actually get to reconciliation. We don't see that reconciliation is even a goal for Truth and Conciliation, but we do hope to get to the place of conciliatory work. And some of that conciliatory work will look like reparations. Some of that conciliatory work will look like ways in which we restructure policy and legislation in the United States. But we are aiming for the sky, and that is what we desire for conciliation in our country.
Thank you. I see in the chat many expressions of support for you, and I'd like to, there is one question that asks specifically how can we support you, and I'd like to broaden that question to also ask you to share with us how we can support the many individuals who are not okay.
Mm-hmm. So on a larger scale, please support Truth and Conciliation. You can go to truthandconciliation.org. Take the pledge, share our work. That is the larger piece, because we really truly do want to do this work around the country. Support of me, please continue to share this video and even share the story about what is happening, and also the ways in which Black voices, academics and activists are often silenced. We went through a process to get to a place for even UCCS to regard my work and my statement as not just an emotional response. So please continue to share this work and to uplift I know it sounds ridiculous, but the validity of my experience, right? Because I don't believe that we have seen the end of the reactions and the impact. And then beyond me, continue to check in with genuine friends. Like if you are in genuine relationship with people of color, to seriously check in. We are experiencing Lunar New Year tomorrow, and the rise of racial violence on our Asian Pacific Islander community is ridiculous in this country. So many people are feeling it right now, and they are not okay. So please, if you are in genuine relationship, check in on your people. And then lastly, do the work. It really is time for white community to step up and educate the white community about white racial violence.
I wonder if I could ask you to just expand that response a little bit further. As you were speaking, I couldn't help but think about our students and how we can best support our students. And so your thoughts specifically for our student population who need our support.
Absolutely. Please pay attention to what they are doing. There are several students who are bringing forth a Black Lives Matter resolution to the campus. And whether you agree with the resolution or not, at least let them know that they are heard and that their perspective is valid, and help them to articulate what they might want to see for this campus. Also, encourage them to utilize the resources that we have in the Wellness Center, in the Mosaic office, to let them know that they are not by themselves. This pandemic, this remote learning, this remote experience has a lot of people feeling extremely isolated. So checking in on students, it might be extra work for a lot of us who are already feeling that way. But they need it too. And our faculty of color absolutely need support right now. If we can lighten loads and burdens, doing as much as we possibly can for that. And I know I say that as annual evaluations are in front of everybody. So yeah, just building and growing in the space of community as much as possible. And be all right if people are like, this is what I need. Sometimes I am on these work calls and I'm like, I'm just not turning on my camera because that's what I need in the moment, right? And sometimes like our students need that. Our other faculty need like permission to do that, you know?
Yeah. Thank you. I hope, unfortunately, we are just about out of time. As we've talked in the past, these conversations are ongoing and could last much longer today than an hour, but we only have an hour. So I'd like to thank you for sharing your expertise and your experience with us, for encouraging this community to, as you say, do the work and to participate in this journey. So thank you again, Dr. Rose Spalding, and for our audience members, thank you for joining us. As I mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, this recording will be available on YouTube, and we will post that link on the GLINT website. And we look forward to seeing you at our next GLINT Talk Series presentation, which will be March 11th. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Rose Spalding.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.